So I've been asked to do a new basic install video because it's been a few years since I did the original one, and I guess there's been a few changes in the basic install process, but I'll just work through it here now. The machine I'm doing this on is that little mini NAS I did a video on before. I'll put a link in the description. I went to 9front, grabbed the ISO, put it on a thumb drive, and booted it, and here we are. So this is what you get. So the command to start the install is inst start. So the first thing it's going to ask is what you want for your file system. So config-fs. And we do have a new option here. This is the good enough file system, also known as GEFS. I'm going to go ahead and go with that one. So I've already done some videos on the other file systems. So first thing it's going to do is want to partition the disk. So I have 3 drives in here, and the NVMe drive is going to be SDN0, and that's the one I want to use. Actually, I'll make this window a little bigger and see all the options. So yeah, there's SDE0, 1, and the SDN0. So I'll choose SDN0. And it shows me, oh, I left a, no wait, this is saying, this is using disk edisk. It's using it to create a Plan 9 partition. This is what it suggests, and that's good enough. So I won't need a Plan 9 partition on there. I'm going to write and quit. Next is prep disk. So it's going to put sort of stuff inside the Plan 9 partition. So I will be using, let's go ahead and giving me SDN0/Plan9 as the default. I'll go ahead and take that. Now it's going to ask here if I want to use the ESP partition or the 9FAT partition. And since this is a newer drive, it has an ESP partition for the GPT style partitions. And I'm going to go ahead and go with that. Later I can demonstrate how this is slightly different from some of the previous instructions I had on accessing the 9FAT partition. Go with that. And it's going to suggest putting in an NVRAM partition and use up most of it. This is like a 500 gigabyte NVMe. Most of it's going to be used up for the base file system. So that's what it's suggesting. So I'm just going to go ahead and write and quit. It's going to mount the FS. Start setting it up. I do want to remit, so that means to format. So that was a pretty quick process, but we can go through it here real quick to see what it did. So it went ahead. This is a command that gets run for setting up a GEFS system. So this is the name that would show up in serve. If you want to access it, so we can see that over here. There's the new FS, and like the other sort of file systems, there's also a command pipe, so you can actually access it with a console and send commands directly to the file system. So when it reams or does a format, you start off by adding in a first sort of user to it, and that's going to be Glenda, and these are some other options, and then finally the file system location of where it's going to access the file system. So that formatted it, and then it loaded it. And then these are the sort of the processes it goes through to set up the first user. So it mounted it. It also mounted the admin partition, which is where you'd go add users and stuff. And then made some directories and changed the owners of them. So now there's a file system set up that'll have a Glenda user and some other things. So the file system's ready. Next is to configure the network. Now, if you just want to do DHCP, like you're just going to set up a single user terminal and you have a Wi-Fi router or something in the house that hands out addresses, you just hit enter here because automatic is the default. I'm going to do a manual here. I'm going to set my IP address. My address, my network mask, gateway on this little subnet that I'm on. Use a public one here. All right, so now mount dist means it's going to mount the distribution. And we can just pull from slash, because that's currently where, being that it booted off the USB drive, slash has all the files in it. Now we'll do the copy. And unlike previous ones in the past, I might not actually have to skip through this, because GFS is pretty fast. And this is also running on NVMe drive. But yeah, you can sort of keep an eye on stats here to see that, it is indeed doing stuff. And there, it's already done. So yep, pretty quick when you're using the newer file system and an NVMe drive. So NDB setup, this is going to be, what the system's going to be named. Ultimately, I'm going to put this back as my my personal home grid's file server, so I'm going to name it Central again. And time zone setup. I'm on the US Pacific Coast. I can just sort of send that down. I'm going to do the boot setup. And so, it says no default. So, again, I'm not using the 9FAT partition in this one. I'm going to go ahead and use the ESP partition that sort of came on this drive already. Go ahead and send that. You can see here it copied over all the various files it'll needed to boot. So it says it's done with everything, so I'm going to go ahead and hit finish to reboot and pull out the USB drive. Oh, it's rebooting now. Let's see if we get a video signal back. Yep. Here we go. So this time now it's giving me the option to boot off the, a little extra message popped up. Oh, that's for the network. There's actually 4 networking ports on here, so sometimes you get some extra garbage from the networking ports getting loaded up in one order or another. But yeah, you can see here that there's now set to want to boot off SDN0. So let's go ahead and enter for that. I'm still Glenda. And yeah, for now it's, this isn't a very sophisticated machine, so trying to actually get it to, run the windowing system in 1080p is kind of difficult. But in the end, I don't intend to have this thing's going to be running headless, but for now, I'll at least demonstrate that this thing is indeed working as a sort of single user, terminal. And here we are. So now this is your basic sort of 9front install. You can log in as Glenda. I now have access to the hard drive. So here's my directory that I'm in, my user directory for Glenda that was created when I first formatted the file system. And it will do sort of your typical 9front stuff. Let's see here. Do the classic games cat clock. There we go, got our cat clock and everything. So yeah, if that's all you want to do is just sort of play around with it, that's your basic install. In the next step here, I will be configuring this to boot as a file and auth server. And then once it's set up like that, you can talk to it using something like drawterm. So I've played around with my little single user terminal long enough, and now I want to set it up to be a file and auth server. So that's going to require a couple steps, especially because it's kind of going to be doing 2 things, both handling authorization to make sure that people are authorized to access the file system, and also serving those files. So it already has the disk in it. It's already formatted. There's one user called Glenda already set up for the file system. So first thing we got to do is set up authorization. Now the key to this, especially once this thing boots as a server to do that, is there's going to be a small piece of the hard drive set up as NVRAM. So I used NV0 as my NVMe drive here to be my main drive, and see there's an NVRAM partition. So normally the command to set that up is auth right key, and it's going to look for this NVRAM partition. It can kind of automatically do it, but to make sure it finds the exact partition you want, you can set an environmental variable for NVRAM. It's currently not set, so I'm going to set that. Make it dev sdn0 NVRAM. So now when I see that, so auth right key. All right, so it hasn't been used before, so it's going to complain that the current key is garbage. We will set it as Glenda will be the host owner. The domain will be my home grid domain. I don't have a sexstore key, so I'm going to skip that. And then I need to put in the password that I'm going to be using for Glenda. And I have to keep this consistent with every other time I enter in a password for Glenda. From the password. And this is asking if I want to use the old encryption method, which I do not. And now that is set. Next step is to then actually put Glenda into the authorization system. So for that, I need access to the key file system, which is the command auth/keyfs. I will then run change user to add the user Glenda. This is going to be the same exact password that I used for the NVRAM. No, never expire. And then you could enter in other stuff. When it comes to the email address, there's actually a system in there to, if you put an expiration date, it'll actually send emails to people notifying them their password will expire. There we go. So now if I ran that auth keyfs again, just gonna turn on scroll. It does indeed say that there's now one key in the system. So the next step is going to be setting up the network database. Let's go and set this to scroll to, and for that we need to change the NDB files. We're going to do local here. So you can just sort of like use this example. And it's typically what I do is I just go ahead and copy it. And the mouse cording there. And get rid of the hashes, which are just the comments. Okay. So my auth server is going to be central. My auth DOM is home grid again. IPnet, I'll call it home grid. So this is not my IP range. I'm using 10.9.0.0. That's fine for an IP mask. My gateway machine by default will be, was it 9.1? I was going to use the public DNS. So my auth machine will be central again. And the rest of these I don't really need because I'm not using them. But I will need, if I want to boot anything off this later, which I will, to make sure that all the other systems on the network know that central is the file server. So the important one really is setting up this. This is going to be checked later during the boot process. after it's told to boot as a CPU server, it'll see if the machine, the host name, matches the entry in auth. If it is, it'll run the extra steps to run the authorization software. I'll go ahead and put to save that. And then the other step is to actually set the machine up to boot as a CPU server rather than a terminal. So earlier on, I showed that I didn't use 9front this time to hold my my boot files. I used the ESP partition. So normally to get to that, you could just use 9front ESP. So mine is complaining, and there's a reason for that. If we go ahead and look at the 9fs is just a script, runs a bunch of stuff. It's going to run through all your storage devices looking for ESP. If you notice when I did the install, this thing is set up to be a mini NAS. So there's, several hard drives in it. One of the other hard drives has an ESP partition. So it's getting confused because there's multiple of those. If you run across this problem, you can manually run the command. So if you go back up here, you can see what they're doing. They're stepping through, and eventually they're going to mount using serve DOS, at a place, this is going to be ESP, the partition it found. So we can just manually do that ourselves. We'll use serve. Well, let's first make sure serve DOS is even running. So let's, yep, there it is. So all we got to do is mount with the ability to create using serve DOS. We will mount it at n ESP, and I'm going to specify the partition to use serve DOS to access, and that's going to be dev sdn0 ESP. Now if we go to NESP and we look at what's here, here is all my boot stuff. So there's my kernel. There's going to be some EFI files in there for doing the UEFI booting stuff. And then there's my plan9.ini file. So let's go ahead and make the changes to that. So the first one is going to be that our service just will equal CPU. The other one is we need to read that NVRAM partition on boot to load up the sort of host owner credentials so that we can then unlock the whole authorization system. And so I'm going to make sure that we're hitting the right hard drive. So I'm going to specify that's the NVRAM partition on N0. And the next thing is to change this. So the boot args, I'll just comment this out. Instead of boot args, I'm going to use no boot prompt, which means it won't sit there and wait for me to hit enter on a default or anything. It's just going to boot whatever I put in this line. So I'm still booting off the local hard drive. Going to be dev sdn0 fs for file system. But this time I want to set it to, announce and let people access it from the outside world. So we're going to put TCP, an asterisk. That means anyone can access it. And it's 564 is the default file system, at least the unencrypted TCP file system access. And that's really all I have to do. Actually, I'm going to put in a couple more here. If you really want to get specific, there's a couple other NVRAM options to put in there just to make sure that it's getting it correctly. The other is NVR offset. So you can use a file or something else. You can put the NVRAM anywhere you want, and you could add an offset, to say, hey, it's in this file if you go so far in. So this is on the partition. The offset would be 0. And the default length, which is NVR length, be 512. Because typically this will just set to use, you know, one block on the storage device. We'll go ahead and put that. And now we can see if it boots. So go ahead and do fs halts with an R to reboot. So here it goes. The BIOS. Here's the plan 999. And there we go. So now it's set up as, you know, central, and as typical with a CPU server setup, this thing expects to be run headless, so it's not going to load graphics by default. You can manually bind them in, or you can go back to your default settings from before by running screen RC. You'll go through this whole step here again. That basically, this is screen RC is run when you set it up as a terminal, and it's just not run when you set it up as a CPU server. You can manually run it, and then I can run Rio, and so you can totally run a monitor on here if you want. Even go stats back in here. So that's the quickest and easiest way to do that, is just to go ahead and run the command screen RC, and that'll just, it's just a script, and it does everything that needs to be set up to run your graphics. So now that that's set up, I'll go over and start connecting to it from other computers. And now I'm running drawterm here from a Linux box to that new file and auth server. Run stats. Oops, wrong keyboard. As you can see, though, I now get the full 1080p here. So here we go, stats. LMISC. There we go. I'm running on central. You can now get a high quality cat clock going again. And even with drawterm, you can do stuff like, you know, stream Doom over or something. Don't have any speakers hooked up right now, though, so I have nowhere to pipe out the sound to, but at least it'll, you know, run the game. And yeah, that's basically all there is to it. So that's, you know, it's 2005 now, and that's walking through a fresh install of 9front, both as a plain single user terminal with a local file system and as your own file and auth server. So the file and auth server comes in handy if you don't have a lot of spare hardware around. You can set it up to, say, run inside a virtual machine, provided you can get some way to pass through the network connection to the outside world, and then you can use something like drawterm to talk to it if you want. Anyway, I hope that was helpful, and as always, have fun.